Hi, everybody. My name is Troy Mikanovich. I am a senior consultant over at the Center for Writing and Rhetoric. And today I'm just going to make a quick video talking about a resource that if you've been to our center, you've probably heard about, but if you haven't, it's a great resource to use. And that is the University of Manchester Academic Phrasebank. Even though I have a beautiful slide up here to start with, this video is going to be a little bit more informal, just navigating this resource a little bit, talking to you a little bit about different ways that you can use it in your writing, whether that writing be for full research papers, research proposals, parts of research papers like literature reviews, things like that. Okay, let me stop my share here. So with something like a research paper, you can always imagine that even though no matter what field you're in, lots of different research papers have kind of lots of different requirements in these different disciplines, they still kind of have to do the same thing, right? They still have to introduce the topic that they're talking about. They still have to introduce what other scholars have said about that topic and critically evaluate it, right? A literature review. And they also have to, describe their results and then analyze those results in some sort of discussion section, right? Now, whether or not your field has those kind of discrete or demands those discrete individual sections in a paper or not, you still have to do those kinds of things, right? No matter what your methodologies are, no matter what kind of research question you're doing, you're essentially doing those things. You're asking a question, you're introducing evidence in order to answer that question to support your thesis statement, and then you're having to analyze that evidence in order to justify the argument that you're making, and finally talk about why any of it is important. The resource that I want to point you to, and the link will be along with this video, is called the University of Manchester Academic Phrasebank. And if you see here at the top, that's just phrasebank.manchester.ac.uk. We have a PDF copy as well, but for your use right now, just navigating it online can be really helpful. And what the academic Phrasebank is it's kind of like a database or repository of general academic phrases, right? I think what they call it is the phraseological nuts and bolts of writing. And it's organized according to the different sections that you'd have in a research paper, or, if you're not in the social sciences, your papers aren't quite so regimented. Think about it as being organized according to like the rhetorical moves that you need to make in a paper, right? You have to introduce your paper, introduce your topic, introduce your questions, introduce your main arguments. You need to talk about what other scholars have said or done. You need to talk about ways that their research is inadequate or insufficient to answer your question. You have to talk about what you're doing to answer your question. You have to actually report the results in some way, delve into that data, discuss it, analyze it, interpret that data that you looked at, and finally talk about your general conclusions, why this is important. The best way to get used to using this resource is really just to jump in. And so that's why this is going to be a little bit more of an informal video, right? But let's say you're starting a paper out and you're like, okay, well, I know I need to introduce my topic, right? The introductions are the worst things to write, right? So if you want to introduce your topic, there's lots of different ways to do it, right? You can establish the importance of your topic for the world or society. You can establish the importance of the topic for the specific discipline that you're in. You can do it with a sense of like the time frame, right? Like, is it more important now than previously? And you can establish the importance of the topic as a problem, right? Rather than just some phenomenon you're looking at, but as like an actual necessary problem that needs to be solved. And there's lots of other things, establishing or identifying controversies within the field. And so you see each one of these little links here suggests a different possible way that you could identify the importance of a paper that you're writing, right? Or the topic that your paper is about. So let's click on one. Underneath each one of these little plus signs here, you see that it gives, 10 to 20 different ways to write the exact same thing, right? X is fundamental to blank. X has a pivotal role in blank. X is frequently prescribed for blank. X is fast becoming a key instrument in blank, right? Each one of these things is a different way essentially to say like, hey, this thing's important, read the rest of the paper. Same thing for establishing the importance of the topic for a discipline, right? The concepts of X and Y are central to blank. X has been in objective research since they said the 1960s, but it could be whatever, right? And you notice that even though each one of these different kind of phraseological nuts and bolts, as they say, or like sentence stems, does basically the same thing, establishing the importance of the topic for world and society. Each one does it maybe with a slightly different flavor or a slightly different way of doing it, right? So saying that something is fundamental is different than saying that something is a central issue, for example, or saying something that there's a growing body of literature on something is different than saying that something it has an important role in addressing a specific issue. I think I just picked that one twice, right? But you notice that each one of them, even though they're in the general subheading of establishing the importance of this topic for the world, kind of does it slightly differently. So that's one thing to keep in mind as you practice using some of these phrases, is that there is still, the task placed upon you to say, hey, what exactly am I trying to say, right? These things aren't one-to-one interchangeable. But you notice that there are a ton of them. And what's useful for this is that if you have trouble just kind of starting, as I do for sure, if you have trouble just starting a paper, sometimes it's helpful just to say, you know what, let's do it like a puzzle. I'm going to just start with this sentence. Recently, there has been renewed interest in blank, and then kind of like Mad Libs, if you ever played Mad Libs, I'm going to fill in those blanks, right? And that just gets you going a little bit. And later on, as you're working through that paragraph, you can say, well, wait a minute, this isn't exactly the right sentence stem that I want to use. I actually want to talk about, okay, well, the past decade has seen rapid development in X and many, right? And what's useful about these, beyond just, giving you some kind of like, starting point, is that they are vaguely interchangeable, right? That you can use them for different ways of talking about the same subject, right? So let's actually practice by looking at a real paper. And one thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to find the real paper as we're talking about it, mostly to show you that there's some artistry here, but that this is truly something that can be done with any piece of writing, any piece of academic research writing that you're working on, right? I haven't set this up. So let's go to Google Scholar. And I did search to make sure I could find an article, but I haven't looked at the article. Let's look at vaccines and public opinion, something that's obviously timely, so we can use some of that. Obviously has a wider set of importance, so we could look at some of that. And, if you ever used Google Scholar before, you can check out some of the resources. But let's just look at this first thing here. Effects of Facebook comments on attitudes towards vaccines, the roles of perceived distributions of public opinion and perceived vaccine efficacy. Great. So by Kim Ham Seo. And let's scroll out a little bit. You can either look at the full article. Let's look at the PDF real quick. Great. So don't need to read the abstract. Despite scientific evidence of vaccine efficacy, a delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccine still exists among people, causing vaccine preventable diseases in the United States. All right, let's just take this topic sentence here and we'll copy it. Let's open up a Word document. So we have the opening line from our piece here. Despite scientific evidence of vaccine efficacy, a delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccines still exists among people, causing vaccine preventable diseases in the United States. Now let's go with the academic phrase bank here, and we will zoom out a little bit so you can see things. Introducing work. Margins right so you can see everything. Great. So let's look at how this particular sentence introduces its main topic. We have, despite scientific evidence of vaccine efficacy, a delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccine still exists among people, right? So still exists, this part here, that suggests something along the lines of like a timely introduction, right? This is a timely problem that we're talking about right now. It's important immediately. And if you're watching this video in years and years, hopefully it's not still so immediate. And here, the second one is, oh, well, this is actually a problem that needs to be solved, right? That this problem they've identified, vaccine hesitancy, is causing vaccine preventable diseases to persist in the United States, right? So we have two different things that they're doing here in the topic sentence. First, they're identifying some sort of timely problem, and second, they're identifying it as a problem, and not just like, not just something that you want to study in general. So if we scroll down here and say, okay, well, what's another way that we can establish the importance of the topic of the time frame given, right? So let's take this first one. You have recently, there has been renewed interest in blank, right? And so you can imagine, okay, I can take that sentence and I can say, recently, there has been renewed interest in the way that that a delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccines can cause otherwise preventable diseases to persist in the United States, right? And if we wanted, we could even be a little bit more specific. Recently, with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a renewed interest in the way that a delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccines can cause otherwise preventable diseases to persist in the United States. Great. So you see here, this sentence up here, this first sentence, does basically the same thing that the second sentence, but now the second sentence has an increased emphasis on the timeliness of this discussion, right? Let's now try and write a sentence that focuses on the second part, causing vaccine preventable diseases in the United States, right? So we can say, oh, well, I here want to establish the importance of this topic as a problem to be addressed. So we'll click on that. So of particular concern blank, a key issue is blank. What else do we have? Okay. How about we do there, this last one. We'll make it a real big problem, right? There's an urgent need, right? There is an urgent need to address the problems caused by vaccine hesitancy in the United States, right? And so you're like, okay, well, that's still a little bit vague compared to the earlier sentences. So now here's where we have to do some of that massaging. Say, okay, well, in particular, the delay in acceptance or flat out refusal of vaccines causes otherwise vaccine preventable diseases to persist. Period. Right? Okay, great. So now we've taken this topic sentence and we say, hey, now I'm doing the same thing as in this first sentence, but I am emphasizing the problem aspect. Now my paper is much more clearly saying, hey, everybody get on board. This is what we need to do, right? And it's not just with topic sentences that you can do that, though, of course, I wanted to highlight topic sentences. And I'm not going to do it for every part of the paper, but I do want to draw your attention to the different ways that you can use the different tabs in the University of Manchester Academic Phrasebank to do a similar thing on your own paper, to do a similar thing as we just did where we're playing around with these sentence stems. So let's say you go to referring to sources, and this is the one that I always emphasize to students, especially if you are working on a literature review. Remember, part of the purpose of the literature review is to justify your own research by identifying some sort of research gap, some sort of place in this academic conversation that you fit into. And so I always direct students down to the oh, no, it's actually on the introduction, right? I'll go back to the introducing work. I always point students towards this identifying the paucity or lack of previous research in their introductions and literature reviews, because it gives you this handy table here that says, while some research has been carried on blank, no studies have been found which blank. This is like the kind of core, like, Platonic ideal of a research gap statement. While we know this, we do not know this, right? And that's in the introduction section. But for more general comments on the literature, you can go to referring to sources and say, okay, well, I want to give some general comments on the relevant literature. So maybe this could be a topic sentence within your literature review and say, okay, well, different theories exist which blank, or much of the literature since the mid-1990s emphasizes blank, right? And so maybe you say, okay, well, I want to focus on the history, or in this case, let's focus on the methodologies, right? The methodological approaches. So most researchers investigating X have utilized quantitative methods that emphasize, survey data over ethnographic interviewing data, stuff like that. Or you say, okay, well, this is what's been established, right? Previous research has established blank, and you see again, we have a table that you can use, and this table can fit in really well with that while statement that we looked at earlier. So we say, up until now, several studies have found blank, however, they have not yet established blank, right? So this is a great place to practice forming a research gap. And you can do this for every single part of your paper, describing the methodology of your paper, reporting the results of your paper, discussing the findings, and finally writing the conclusions. Along the left-hand side, you see something called general language functions. While these top tabs are all about the kind of rhetorical moves that you're making in your paper, the different things you have to do to keep your audience following along, the general language functions are, like it says on the tin, more kind of general writing tasks, right? So let's say a good example I always use is, you always have to hedge your bets in academic writing. So let's be a little bit cautious, right? So I'm going to click being cautious. And I want to be cautious when I'm explaining or interpreting my results. So I can say, okay, well, these findings cannot be extrapolated to all patients, right? Or these results do not rule out the influence of other factors in X, Y, or Z, right? So there's a lot of ways to say the exact same stuff. And that's really what the University of Manchester Academic Phrasebank is for. Obviously, there's a ton in it, right? And if you come over to the Writing Center, we'll be able to help you navigate some of it, practice, just like I did with that one line, maybe interspersing some of these sentence stems into your own writing. But the number one thing I encourage all students to do with this is just to play around with it a little bit, right? Take 30 minutes. It doesn't need to be a focused 30 minutes, right? While you are eating dinner, while you're watching TV or something, take 30 minutes and just kind of go through and, charge yourself up looking at these different ways of writing. It can be really helpful if you're stuck getting started. It can be really helpful if you have no idea how to start editing or revising your paper. And it can be really helpful at the outlining stage, right? You have to outline these individual parts. Throw in a sentence stem or two so that it gives you something to start with rather than having to, start tabula rasa, right? If you do have any questions on using this resource, please give us a visit over at the Center for Writing and Rhetoric. All our consultants can help you navigate this resource. We've all taken a long time to look at it. But beyond that, thanks for taking time to watch this video. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And again, the link for the resource will be included with the video, but you can also just Google University of Manchester Academic Phrasebank. Okay, thanks everybody.